pleasures of your body. I don't know the pains and pleasures of your body, but Krishna knows the pains and pleasures of everybody and everything, just absolutely everything. And then when it comes to bliss, we experience the same ecstatic bliss, amazing in quality, but not as much as he does in quantity. This is a very important point. So in that sense of quality as opposed to quantity, there's oneness. There's oneness. We are as blissful as we can be. And it's the same bliss, but Krishna is just all-pervadingly blissful. So that's important to understand. But the impersonalists, they don't understand that. The difference. They think that we are quantitatively as great as Krishna, as the absolute truth. Quantitatively. But we're not. We're not all pervasive. We're not all knowing. Yes. But he is, so there's this distinction. So unfortunately, the impersonalists, they make these kind of fatal mistakes and become confused. Very confused. Krishna, we may be capable of controlling our situations, but Krishna's capable of controlling every situation. And even we, at least in our conditioned state, as we are now, we don't even understand ourselves completely. Interesting point though, when we are not conditioned any longer, when we're in our purified condition, we understand ourselves completely. Ourselves. Not everything or everyone. But for example, Prabhupada makes the point that, it's in a letter particularly, Prabhupada makes the point that when we're in our purified state, we can remember everything that we've been through in all the different lifetimes we've been through. We can remember all of it. Now we can't. We can't remember more than this lifetime, and we can't even remember all of this lifetime. You know, even just as a type of example, but it's a good example. I've been sitting here speaking now the last 5 minutes or so. I could not repeat exactly what I said the last 5 minutes. Although I said it, I couldn't do it. I could sort of, to some degree, maybe give a similar message, but actually, the actual same thing I can't. But in the purified state, you can. And this is why someone like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was famous as, he was called the living encyclopedia. Anything that he heard once in his life, even when he was at school, in his childhood, he could reproduce verbatim, even in his old age. Yeah. Having only heard it once, 50 years before, something like that. So the purified living entity in his or her pure spiritual state is fully conscious of themselves, but not of everything. But Krishna is fully conscious of everything. So it's interesting. All these different facts are there, kind of facts and figures, which are there to help us distinguish between, they're here to help us understand many things, but in this regard of the difference between us and the Lord and what's wrong with the impersonal ideas. Anyway, these things are very helpful for us. Very helpful for us. When Prabhupada was explaining it, that in our purified state we can remember all our lifetimes. And that means millions, many lifetimes. We can remember them all. The question is raised, well, why can't we remember them now? And of course, a simple answer is because where our consciousness is covered over by illusion, and therefore we're conscious in limited ways. But in regard to remembering our different lifetimes, Prabhupada makes the point that if we were to be able to remember all our lifetimes in the state we're in now, and how many times we suffered incredibly, how many times we didn't just suffer, but we were killed in all sorts of, there's, despite what some people may say, there's no nice way to be killed. It's all horrible. The only possible positive perspective is if you're Krishna conscious enough, you may not be affected too much by it. But otherwise the experience is ghastly, actually. So, and we've been through it how many millions and billions and zillions of times? We don't know, but it's really lots. So Prabhupada makes the point that if we could remember all these things, particularly all the horror and the extreme difficulty, it'd be too much for our consciousness in the conditioned state. And one would go into some sort of psychological meltdown, which happens to some people. There's even one devotee, I don't know if he came here, he was in South Africa for a while, American, Pathasarati. He was here, right. He was in the American army in Iraq, and he fought, and he killed. And he saw he was like in charge of a group, and he saw his own men, some of them get killed, and some of them died in his arms, literally. But he's a devotee, was at that time and still is a devotee, and like a very dedicated devotee. He wasn't sort of fooling around in Krishna consciousness. But the effect of all of that was such that eventually he had a breakdown, which he recovered from. These things can be recovered from. But his mind, it just got too much for his mind. So this is what happens with people who get exposed to extreme horror. In many cases, at least at some point, they lose, their conscious state is unable to deal with it. And the mind sort of melts out. So Prabhupada makes the point then, if we could remember all those things, it would be too much. It would be far too much. But in the purified state, it's not. a big problem, because one is completely beyond these things. Even as a devotee becomes very advanced, very advanced, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains at the end, right towards the end of Madhurya Kadambini, if you've ever read that book or encountered it. Very interesting. He makes the point that a devotee on the level of prema, pure Krishna prema, like highly developed prema, the devotee, such a devotee, is so transcendental to the material nature that that devotee may not even notice it when his body dies. You know, what to speak of, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse 13. What's chapter 2 verse 13? Dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovananda jara tata dehantara praptir dearest tatra namuyate. As the embodied soul passes within this body from childhood to youth and to old age, then one similarly goes into another body at death. But the dhira is the actual term. The self-controlled person, dhira, basically means like self-controlled, tolerant, like highly tolerant person, is not bewildered by that change of body at death. Most people are, and if you've ever seen people go through death, but most people, they just cannot deal with death and they become overwhelmed. But if you're a dhira, then dhiras tatra na muyati, then the sober person is not overwhelmed by the experience of death of this body any more than any of us have been overwhelmed by going from being children to youths, and now, you know, most of us are basically adults at least. But you don't really notice it so much. It's certainly not like, you know, anything to do with a traumatic experience. So, yes, the very elevated devotee, Shri Giri Govardhan Shishikonata Ki Jai. What to speak of being able to handle it, handle the situation. The very advanced devotee may not even notice it happening, but rather after some time he or she notices, hey, wait a minute, what happened to my material body? It's gone. It must have died, because it did. But he or she just didn't notice at all. They're that transcendental. So anyway, and that's interesting and very important. Another aspect of all of this is that the impersonalists, they say that, well, their slogan is Brahma Satyam, Jagan Mithya. Brahman, or spirit, is Satyam, is truth. Whereas Jagan, this world, and all the manifestations of it, including our bodies, which are parts and parcels of this world, they're Mithya. You can say false. You can say false. It's a little more subtle than false. It's more just like kind of misleading. Easy to be mistaken about, rather than just point blank false. So the absolute truth then is not a person, impersonal. Not a person, but just some sort of spiritual state of some sort which lacks personality, which lacks different features of the personal condition, like senses, being able to perceive different things in different ways, emotions, responding in different ways to different situations, and so on. The absolute truth, or Brahman, according to them, is without these, specifically impersonal. But Prabhupada made a very, very simple point that how can something which does not have a certain attribute produce something else which has that attribute? If the original, the cause, does not have a certain, like, personality, for example, how can that personality-less thing produce another thing or being which has a personality? Or just a simple way of putting it is, if you plant apple seeds, you'll get apple trees. You'll not get orange trees or mango trees. You're just not going to at all. And it's not like 1 in a million apple seed. They're actually apple seeds, in fact. It's not that 1 in a million or 1 in a billion will produce a banana palm. It just is not going to happen, because they lack that capacity. Yeah. So if the absolute truth lacks the capacity of personality, of emotions, and things like this, then just by the most simple type of definition, it cannot produce something which has those things. If it appears to do that, it's an interesting point. If the source appears to produce something which it does not contain, do you understand what that means? It means we haven't understood the source. What we're calling the source is only partially the source. It's not completely the source. Do you get the idea? It's very simple. In principle, but conditioned souls are very expert at becoming bewildered. Not exactly expert, but immensely capable of becoming confused. It's amazing. Just like when you get old. I don't know who here is over 70. Are you over 70?
56.
Oh, just a young boy. And what's your age?
63.
63. Yeah, you still got some life ahead of you.
My father is 73, 74 too.
Oh, okay, wow. He's older than me, anyway. Yes, as you get older, you become more capable, you become more expert at forgetting things. Oh yes, you can forget almost anything without trying. You just find it's just gone. Anyway, so Prabhupada, let me conclude, keep it brief today, let me conclude by pointing out that Prabhupada refers to Shankaracharya here, that Shankaracharya confirms in his comments on Bhagavad Gita that Narayan, or the personality of Godhead, is transcendental to the creation. Yeah. So, Narayana Paro Vyaktat is the Sanskrit term. Very famous Sanskrit term from Shankaracharya. Narayana Paro means is superior to Vyaktat, the manifest world. And he even says, I forget exactly, what is it? Something rather muda, mrte. He's back. Yeah, it's our friend. Twice he came yesterday, or she. Yeah, muda, muda. Bhaja Govinda, Bhaja Govinda. Bhaja Govinda, what is it? Mudha Mate. Yeah, Mudha Mate, something, something, something. So he's telling them, just worship Govinda, Krishna. Just worship Krishna. Just worship Krishna. Mudha, you fools. And then I forget the exact Sanskrit, but what he says is, you're so caught up in trying to sort of twist different meanings out of Sanskrit verses. Yeah, you're so absorbed in that you miss the points which the Sanskrit verses are trying to make. Yeah. Mudhamate. You fools. So in Shankaracharya, he is the classic impersonalist. He is the supreme impersonalist, basically. Yeah. So, and even he is saying, telling the impersonalists, that you're making a mistake by thinking that Narayan is part of the creation. Because, again, I don't want to complicate things, but the impersonalists generally think that in terms of within the material world, the living entities, there are two categories, Jiva and Ishvara. We're all Jiva. Means we're all conditioned and confused in this world. But Ishvara means when we become, through spiritual development, we become more advanced and less confused than your typical conditioned soul, and we become someone like Krishna, who's capable of speaking high philosophy. Krishna, Lord Shiva, basically the demigods. That they're in this Ishvara category, and Ishvara category means living entities like us, but some of us who have become far less confused, and we're on the edge of realizing Brahman. Not quite realized. May have, many good ideas about it, but we haven't realized. So we haven't actually come to the point of realizing we're Brahman. So that's what they think. But actually, Shankaracharya, so in other words, Ishvara, the Ishvara type of living entity, Krishna, Lord Shiva, people like that, they're almost liberated, but not quite. Just about to step through into a liberated, fully liberated state. But Shankaracharya says, Narayana Paro Vyaktat. Actually, Narayan is transcendental to the material nature. Not just almost transcendental, like some relatively advanced person, but actually transcendental. Hare Krishna devotees, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Did you survive the class today? Or are you sitting there with head spinning again? Any comments, questions, or anything. Disagreements? Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you, Shamaraj. Please accept the humble obeisances. I would like first of all to say a few words of appreciation for the class yesterday that you spoke about two important things that is important for us in our personal application. One were the offenses, about the anarthas offenses, and the second was about the pseudo-guru. Pseudo-guru.
Oh, right, okay, sure.
And there was one thing that I have noted here about the Bhagavad Gita. You summarized the Bhagavad Gita in one sentence, which I found very, I noted it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all living entities should worship Him. Because sometimes when we have to speak to people, we have to be brave and just give the message exactly like it is. The first time that I got such an explanation heard from you.
Oh, okay. Hare Krishna.
And about this section of the Bhagavatam, the process of creation, I find it's not only spiritual, it's also very scientific. If we look at from a scientific point of view, there are many things that we know that scientists are trying to find out how the process of creation started on that. But they are always changing their theories, upgrading, because they find that the previous one. And this is, we find it most completely, the complete version of the process of creation, coming from the Supreme Lord Himself.
And it's not changing. It's been the same for who knows how long. Yeah. It's very interesting. Yeah, this poor old scientists. You know, I mean, in a sense you can say the poor old scientists because they're hoping against hope. It's a hopeless task, actually. But the thing is, they're so arrogant, they won't admit it. You know, I just read about some months ago, like earlier this year, there's this Professor Hawkins, who passed away, but, you know, he was very clever. And he wrote a book for kind of like the average, but intelligent average person, A Brief History of Time, in which he tries to explain about time in his terms. I mean, I never read it, but that was his idea. Oh, you did? Really? But now he passed away. But before he passed away, he was analyzing that book, and he concluded that there were many mistakes in it, and he wanted to revise it. But then he died. So now his son is revising it. Yeah, because there were mistakes in it. So just see, you know, there were mistakes in the original. Now, okay, we've realized there are mistakes, now we're improving it. Later on, we're going to find out there are mistakes in the latest version. And it's just never ending. It'll actually never end. They'll keep finding mistakes. And in other words, it's essentially worthless. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comment, question? Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Toute gloire à Srila Prabhupada. Toute gloire au devant ressemblance.